The summer heat was a suffocating blanket over the city of Boston, but a different kind of chill was spreading. It wasn't a virus or a bacteria. It was something born from the darkest corners of the human mind. People were calling it the echoes. The first reports were dismissed as mass hysteria, a new kind of social media-fueled panic. A man in the South End claimed his apartment walls were bleeding. A woman in Beacon Hill swore the spiders she hated so much were now the size of her hand, scuttling across her living room floor. Then the screams began, not just on the news but on the streets. Ella, a 21-year-old medical student, watched it all with a detached, clinical eye. "It's a psychological phenomenon," she told her friend Mark over a video call. "A feedback loop of shared anxiety. People are seeing what they're told to be afraid of." Mark, a lanky, perpetually paranoid conspiracy theorist, shook his head. "No, Ella, this isn't mass hysteria. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, he saw his son's ghost, the one who died last year, and he's not on social media, not even a little bit. This is something else." Ella scoffed. "Mark, Mr. Henderson is old and grieving. His mind is playing tricks on him. We're med students, we know how the brain works. Stress can manifest physically. It's not a ghost." The first sign that Ella was wrong came not from a textbook, but from a mundane observation. She was studying late in her small apartment, a stack of anatomy books beside her. The air conditioning hummed, a familiar, steady drone. She glanced up, her eyes catching a shadow moving across the opposite wall. It was too fast, too dark to be anything normal. A trick of the light, she told herself. But then she saw it again, this time at the edge of her vision. A fleeting glimpse of a gaunt, skeletal figure standing in the corner of her room just for a moment. Her heart hammered in her chest. She blinked, and it was gone. Just an illusion. Just her mind. She tried to go back to her books, but her focus was shattered. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She'd always prided herself on being logical, on being fearless. Her greatest fear was helplessness, the inability to fix a problem, to save a life. This feeling, this chilling inability to trust her own senses, was exactly that. A few days later, the real horror began. Ella was walking home from the library, the city's usual noise a backdrop to her racing thoughts. She passed a young woman on the sidewalk who was hyperventilating, pointing frantically at an empty patch of pavement. "It's a snake," the woman shrieked. "Get it off me, it's biting me." Ella froze. She looked at the ground. There was nothing there, just concrete. The woman collapsed, thrashing, her eyes wide with terror. A small crowd gathered, whispering and looking at the crazy woman. Ella knelt down, her medical training taking over. She checked the woman's pulse. "Ma'am, there's nothing there. You're safe." "Don't you see it?" the woman sobbed, her body convulsing. "The venom, it's burning." A sudden wave of nausea hit Ella. The woman's panic was a physical thing, a palpable energy that seemed to leap from her and latch onto Ella. Ella felt an icy sensation creep up her spine. She stood up, her head swimming. She looked at the people around her. A man was scratching his arm, a look of growing horror on his face. He started screaming. "Ants! Thousands of them! Under my skin!" The screams were a catalyst. One by one, people in the crowd began to react. A girl started clawing at her face, convinced it was melting. A couple huddled together, their eyes darting around as if a monstrous, unseen presence had joined them. The contagion was spreading. The fear was spreading. Ella backed away, a rising panic in her own throat. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the screams, from the sight of people tearing themselves apart with invisible terrors. She made it back to her apartment and slammed the door shut, locking it with a trembling hand. She leaned against the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence of her apartment was a brief comfort, but then she felt it, a creeping sensation on her skin, as if something was slithering just beneath the surface. She looked down at her arm. Nothing. She looked up at the wall. The same shadow, bigger this time, longer. It wasn't moving across the wall. It was coming out of it. It was reaching for her. The fear she had always suppressed, the fear of being helpless, of being unable to understand or control the situation, was no longer a theoretical concept. It was here, in her room, a grotesque mockery of her logical mind. The shadow reached out, its skeletal fingers stretching, and Ella let out a scream that was not her own. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror, and she knew with a horrifying certainty that someone else had just heard it and felt their own fear begin to take hold. The unseen contagion was now a part of her. Ella's scream was a raw, guttural sound that tore through the quiet of her apartment. It wasn't just a sound of terror. It was an invitation. The shadowy figure that had haunted the edges of her vision now stood before her, no longer a fleeting glimpse, but a stark black silhouette. It was tall, impossibly thin, and without a face. It didn't move, but the air around it was cold, as if it was drawing all the warmth and life from the room. Ella's medical training, her logic, everything she knew about the world, collapsed in on itself. This was not a hallucination. It was real, and it was her fear made manifest. She stumbled backward, fumbling for her phone. Her fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to dial Mark's number. The shadow remained, a silent sentinel of her impending madness. The phone rang once, twice, before he answered. "Ella? What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice a strange mix of concern and a morbid kind of vindication. "Mark, it's here. I think I have it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The shadow, it's real." "I know," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "I've been tracking this. It's not a virus, Ella. It's a parasite, an ancient one. I found some old texts, a sort of historical record of plagues. This isn't the first time it's happened. They called it the harvest. It preys on human fear. But it doesn't just make you see things." As he spoke, the horrifying reality of his words hit her. The shadow in the corner of her room began to move. It didn't walk. It flowed, its form shifting and stretching. A long, sharp, claw-like appendage separated from its main body and began to scrape against the floorboards. The sound was a screeching nail on a chalkboard, a sound that bypassed her ears and went straight to her teeth, setting them on edge. It was making physical contact with her world. "What is it?" she whimpered, her eyes glued to the claw. "What does it want?" "It wants to feed on your terror, but the texts say, once it manifests, it can become more than just a vision. It can harm you. Your fear isn't just a trick of the mind anymore, Ella. It's a weapon being used against you." The claw dragged itself closer, its scraping sound now a deafening roar in the small room. Ella scrambled away, her back hitting the cold surface of her bookshelf. As she looked around for a way out, she noticed a crack in the wall just beside the bookshelf. She'd never seen it before. It was small at first, but as the shadow creature loomed closer, the crack began to widen, an inky blackness seeping out. From the hole, a swarm of insects began to pour out, not just a few, but a chittering, writhing mass of centipedes and cockroaches. Her fear of helplessness now had a new, disgusting accomplice. The insects crawled over her textbooks, her bed, the floor, and began to climb up the legs of her pants. "Mark, where are you?" she screamed, swatting at the imaginary bugs. Her skin crawled with phantom sensations. "We need to get out of here." "I'm on my way," he said, his voice laced with a strange, frantic energy. "I'm going to meet you at the old library on Commonwealth. No one goes there, it's the safest place. I have to show you something I found." She hung up the phone and fought her way out of her apartment. The shadow creature a constant silent presence behind her, its scraped claw marks now a physical reality on her floorboards. The sight of them sent a new jolt of terror through her. This wasn't just in her head anymore, it was leaking into the world. She ran through the city streets, the summer heat forgotten, her body cold with dread. The people she passed were a testament to the spreading chaos. A man was swinging a baseball bat wildly at the empty air, convinced he was fighting off a horde of rats. A group of teenagers were huddled together, weeping, seeing ghosts of their own deceased family members. She was not alone in her horror. She was part of it, a carrier. The thought made the nausea she'd felt before return with a vengeance. She met Mark at the library's back entrance. He was hunched over, his shoulders hunched, his eyes wide. She looked at him, relieved to see a familiar face, a friendly presence in this new hellscape. "I knew you'd understand," he said, pulling out a crumbling, leather-bound book from his backpack. "This is it, Ella. The original text. It warns of a being that was sealed away, a creature born from fear itself. It was accidentally released by a group of archaeologists. They weren't looking for treasure. They were looking for a way to suppress human emotion. And they broke the seal on this thing instead." "Mark, look at me," Ella said, trying to ground him. "We have to figure out how to stop this." But his gaze was fixed on something over her shoulder. His eyes, wide with panic, began to water. A single silent tear streaked down his cheek. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's here. It's following you." Ella spun around. There was nothing there, just a flickering street lamp. "Not there," Mark shrieked, pointing at a parked car across the street. "The agent, he's watching us. He knows we know too much." Ella looked at the car. It was an ordinary sedan. No one was inside. Her stomach dropped. Mark's conspiracy theories weren't just theories anymore. They were his fear. And her presence, her infection, had just turned his paranoia into a living, breathing nightmare. She saw the terror in his eyes, the same terror she had felt in her apartment. She had done this to him. She had turned her best friend's mind against him. And just as the horror of her power settled in, the doors of the sedan swung open, and two figures in black suits, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hats, stepped out and began to walk towards them. The two figures in black suits glided across the street, their footsteps silent. They weren't walking, they were flowing, their bodies blurring at the edges as if viewed through a heat haze. To Mark, they were the grim reapers of his conspiracy theories, unstoppable government agents come to silence him. He backed away, his eyes wide with a terror that was now a tangible, living thing. But to Ella, they were a horrifying manifestation of his panic. They were not real. She saw the fear in Mark's eyes, the way his mind was creating a reality out of his greatest anxieties. And she knew with a terrible certainty that she was the one who had brought this on him. Her scream, her helplessness, had infected him. And now, she had to save him. The shadowy figure that had haunted her apartment now stood behind her, a cold presence that whispered directly into her mind. "You can't fight them. You can't save him. You are helpless." Ella closed her eyes, the monstrous voices of fear echoing in her head. She had always prided herself on her logic, on her rationality. Her greatest fear was not being able to control a situation, not being able to find a cure. This fear was the key. She had to use it. "Mark," she yelled, her voice cutting through the silent horror. "They're not real. They're not going to hurt you." But Mark didn't hear her. He could only see the men in black getting closer, their faces now visible, cold, empty, and devoid of emotion. They were not from this world. They were from his mind. He let out a desperate, animalistic scream and ran past Ella, darting into the alleyway behind the library. The two agents followed, still gliding, a terrifying and silent pursuit. Ella was left alone on the sidewalk, the shadowy figure, a silent sentinel behind her. She had a choice. She could run, let Mark's fate be his own, or she could confront the thing that had turned her life into a nightmare. She took a deep breath. She looked at the shadow, the manifestation of her own deepest fear. Helplessness. The word was a poison, a curse. She had to prove it wrong. She took a step towards the shadow. The cold air around it intensified, a low hum of malevolence filling the street. She had a sudden, terrifying epiphany. Mark's conspiracy was right, but he had the wrong enemy. The men in black were his fear. The source of it all was hers. The ancient entity was not a separate being that had been released. It was an ancestral power, a part of her own lineage, and the archaeological dig had simply awakened it. Her ancestors had been the ones to seal it away, to try and suppress it. Her family had known of this all along. The entity was in her blood, passed down through generations. It was a parasite that fed on terror, and it had been dormant for centuries waiting for a suitable host. Ella's logical mind, her fear of being unable to fix things, her desperation to understand and control, had made her the perfect vessel. She had not been a random victim. She had been its destiny. It had used her fear of helplessness to fully integrate into her being. Now it was her turn to decide. Would she be a victim or a host? She walked towards the shadow, her mind a whirlwind of horrifying revelation. She reached out her hand not to fight it, but to touch it. Her fingers passed through its ethereal form and a new kind of power surged through her. A cold, quiet, and beautiful sense of control. The whispers in her mind stopped. The sense of helplessness evaporated. She no longer felt the need to run or fight. She had found the cure. It was not to defeat her fear, but to embrace it. She no longer saw the shadow as a separate entity. It was a part of her now. The unseen contagion was not a plague she had to fight. It was a power she now wielded. A scream echoed from the alleyway, followed by a sickening thud. Ella didn't flinch. She turned and walked toward the sound. She found Mark collapsed on the ground, his face contorted in a final expression of terror. The men in black were gone, but the fear had done its job. It had broken him. Ella knelt beside him, and for the first time, she felt no empathy, no sorrow. She felt power. She was no longer Ella, the terrified medical student. She was the host. And from this day forward, the city of Boston, the entire United States, would not suffer from a plague of fear, but would serve a purpose far more sinister. The unseen contagion would spread not through a scream, but through a terrifying, silent, and permanent infection that would make the world her hunting ground. The terrifying screams that ripped through the night were no longer a sign of the plague's spread. They were a sign of her arrival. The lake house was a glass and wood marvel, a box of modern solitude nestled beside a perpetually fog-laden lake in Northern California. For Kylie, a 24-year-old photographer who thrived on isolation, it was perfect. The old-growth pines and the mirror-like surface of the water were her subjects, her solace. She had always found more comfort in images than in people. Her camera was her shield, and her own face, which she studied meticulously in every mirror, window, and phone screen, was her canvas. She was vain, yes, but in a controlled, artistic way. The first strange occurrence was a simple glitch, as she dismissed it. She was taking a selfie in her bedroom, the lake a hazy backdrop through the massive window pane. She smiled into the screen, hit the shutter button, and then froze. In the frozen image, her reflection was still smiling, but her real face in the background had shifted. Her lips were no longer curved upwards. They were pulled into a thin, tight line, and her eyes, in the fleeting second before the camera captured the image, looked sad. It was a trick of the light, she told herself. A camera artifact. But the glitches continued. A few days later, while she was brushing her teeth, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. She was staring at her own eyes, but her reflection's eyes were darting from side to side, a frantic, almost desperate movement that she wasn't making. A chill ran down her spine. She splashed water on her face and the reflection disappeared, only to reappear a moment later, still gazing at her, still motionless, a perfect mirror of her own fear. She tried to laugh it off, but a seed of doubt had been planted. She called her best friend Liam, a self-proclaimed prankster who loved to scare people with haunted house videos and urban legends. "Dude, you're freaking out over a bad reflection." Liam's voice crackled through the phone. "That old house is probably full of weird angles and weird light. Or maybe you're just stressed. You haven't taken a break in months." "It's not that," Kylie insisted, her voice tight. It's like it has a life of its own. I was looking at my reflection in a puddle a few minutes ago. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, my reflection, it was laughing. A quiet, smug laugh. I wasn't even smiling. Liam's easygoing tone disappeared. "Okay, that's creepy, but probably just a mind trick, you know? Your brain is making connections that aren't there. You've been alone for too long." Kylie tried to believe him, but the feeling of being watched, of being observed by herself, grew stronger. She began to avoid mirrors. She covered the large window in her living room with a blanket. Her camera, once a source of comfort, now felt like a tool for surveillance. The true horror began one night. She was heating up water for tea, staring blankly at the glass kettle as it began to boil. Her reflection in the shiny metal kettle lid was a warped, distorted funhouse version of herself. But then, as the steam began to fog the glass, her reflection began to clear, her face becoming recognizable but not right. The reflection's lips began to move, but her real mouth was shut. The reflection was whispering something, its eyes locked on hers. A wave of nausea hit Kylie. She felt an invisible force pushing her hand forward, closer to the boiling kettle. The reflection's eyes widened in a silent, pleading warning. Her own hands, completely out of her control, reached for the kettle, ignoring the heat, ignoring her brain's frantic screams to stop. It wasn't a choice. It was a command. She screamed, not from the pain of the boiling water, but from the horrifying realization that she wasn't alone in her own body. Someone or something was watching her from the other side of the glass. Her hand touched the scalding hot kettle. The pain was real. A sharp, searing agony that brought her back to herself for a split second. She pulled her hand away, a large, painful red welt now forming on her palm. She looked at her reflection in the glass, and it was still there, smiling a slow, twisted smile, a smile of triumph. It was her, but it wasn't. She had become a prisoner of the reflection. The realization was a crushing weight. Her own reflection had made her hurt herself. The mirror had become a portal, and the one on the other side was wearing her face. She looked at the red welt on her hand, a permanent reminder that the line between herself and the reflected version of herself was now gone. And the worst part? She had just looked at her phone screen, and a new text message was sent to Liam. "I'm going to the lake now, you should come." She hadn't sent it. Her reflection had. Liam arrived an hour later, his cheerful demeanor a jarring contrast to the oppressive silence of the house. He found Kylie huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale. She tried to hide her burned hand, but he saw the angry red welt immediately. "What happened to you?" he asked, his joking tone gone. Kylie's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at the television screen, which was off and acting as a black mirror. Her reflection in the dark glass was smiling a wide, sickly sweet smile. She tried to tell Liam about the kettle, but her reflection in the TV was silently mouthing a different phrase, a silent, mocking dare. "Tell him, I dare you." "It's nothing," she forced out, her voice a tremor. "Just a clumsy accident." Liam's face clouded with concern. "That's a nasty burn, Kylie. It doesn't look like a simple accident. And what's with the blanket over the windows? What's going on?" She tried to explain, her mind screaming for him to understand. "Liam, my reflection. It's not me." As she spoke, her reflection in her phone screen, which lay face up on the coffee table, slowly began to raise its hand. She tried to stop her own hand from moving, but her muscles refused to obey. Her hand slowly rose, pointing a trembling finger at Liam. He looked from her face to her raised hand, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked, a hint of discomfort in his voice. The reflection in the phone screen began to laugh, a silent, twisted laugh. The laughter was so loud inside Kylie's head that she wanted to scream. She fought with every ounce of her will to lower her arm, but it was like fighting against an invisible, all-powerful force. "This is all a joke, right?" Liam said, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "You're getting me back for all my pranks, huh? Okay, I get it. Very funny." It was then that the reflection's control became absolute. Her own hand, the one with the burn, reached out and grabbed a ceramic mug from the table. The mug was one her grandmother had given her. It was her favorite. She knew what her reflection wanted her to do. It wanted her to break her favorite things, to destroy what she loved. "No!" Kylie screamed, but the word was not from her own free will. It came from her reflection's desire. Her body, her hands, her movements were no longer her own. She raised the mug high, and with a shuddering jolt, slammed it onto the coffee table. The ceramic shattered with a sickening crunch. Liam jumped back, his eyes wide. "Kylie, what the hell?" he yelled, his pranking facade gone. "You're scaring me." Tears streamed down her face. "It's not me, Liam, I swear it's not me," she sobbed. But her words were muffled by the reflection's control, which was forcing her lips into a smirk. Liam's phone began to ring. He pulled it out, and his face went pale. "It's my phone number calling me," he whispered, his voice trembling. He showed her the screen, and the caller ID was his own number. "That's not even possible," he stammered, his mind finally breaking from its logical framework. "That's not how it works." He was wrong. Her reflection, a malevolent being of pure reflection, was capable of the impossible. "We have to get out of here," he yelled, grabbing her arm. "You're not well. I'm taking you to a hospital." As they hurried out of the house, a glint of light from the lake caught their eyes. The fog had lifted slightly, and the lake's surface was calm and still, a perfect mirror of the overcast sky. Her reflection appeared on the surface of the water, not just her face but her whole body, as clear as if she were standing on the lake itself. But she wasn't. Her real self was on the lawn, her body frozen with terror. The reflection of her body on the lake's surface moved. It raised its hand and pointed a long, bony finger at a small island in the middle of the lake. "That's where it began," her reflection mouthed, the words a silent promise of horror. Liam, still in a state of shock, looked at the lake. He saw her reflection moving, a separate entity in the water, a ghost in plain sight. "It's trying to tell us something," Liam said, his voice a frantic whisper. Kylie's heart hammered in her chest. The reflection had guided them to the lake, to the very source of its power. This was no longer just about her. It was about Liam too. The reflection's gaze was on him now. It wanted him to see, to believe, to follow. It was luring them with its chilling, silent reflection. And in that moment, Kylie knew with terrifying certainty that her reflection was not a victim of this malevolent spirit. It was the key to its freedom. And Liam was the last person who could stop her from becoming a weapon. Liam was no longer trying to rationalize. He was running on pure terror. The reflection of Kylie on the lake's surface was so clear, so lifelike, it was impossible to deny. Her mirrored self was beckoning to the small, moss-covered island in the center of the lake, a dark silhouette against the foggy backdrop. "That's where it began," the reflection had mouthed. Kylie's body felt like a marionette with a master pulling its strings. The reflection was forcing her to walk towards the dilapidated old dock where a single rowboat was tied. She fought it with everything she had, her legs trembling with the effort. "Liam, don't! We have to leave," she choked out, her voice a desperate whisper. But the reflection on the lake's surface was pointing at the boat, its expression a cold, unfeeling mask of her own face. "It wants us to go there, to the island," Liam said, his voice a tightrope of fear and fascination. "I'll go with you. We can figure this out. It's the source." The reflection's grip on Kylie's body tightened. It forced her to nod in agreement, a slow, unnatural movement of her head. They clambered into the rickety boat. The reflection forced her hands to grip the oars, and her real body began to row, the rhythmic dips and pulls a hypnotic, sinister motion. The water was a perfect mirror, and every stroke sent ripples of her distorted reflection across the lake. As they neared the island, Kylie had a moment of clarity, a terrifying surge of her own will. The reflection's control, while immense, was not absolute. It was a power struggle. She managed to stammer out a truth that had just dawned on her. It's not just in the house, Liam. It's in every reflective surface. The water, the phone, the windows. It needs reflections to move. It's a prisoner of the glass. We have to break it all. Liam, now understanding the horrific scope of the situation, pulled out his phone. Its screen was a perfect mirror. He looked at his own face, then at Kylie's pleading eyes. He didn't hesitate. With a trembling hand, he slammed the phone against the wooden oar, shattering the screen into 1,000 tiny shards. The moment the glass broke, Kylie felt a shudder run through her. Her reflection on the surface of the lake rippled, distorted, but didn't disappear. The entity was too powerful, too vast. They made it to the island shore. It was a small, desolate patch of land covered in ruins, the remnants of an ancient, submerged structure. As they explored, they found the collapsed entrance to what looked like a submerged temple, its walls made of a strange, translucent material. An old sign lay nearby, half buried in the mud, its faded letters spelling out archaeological dig site. This was it, the source, the place where the entity was freed. Kylie's control was slipping. Her reflection was now a fully formed, independent entity, standing on the ruins a few feet away, its face a grotesque parody of hers. It smiled a wide, triumphant smile as it forced Kylie's real body to climb the slippery rocks. "It was waiting for me," she managed to gasp, a horrifying realization dawning on her. The archaeologists had not just broken a seal, they had broken a containment field. The entity had been a malevolent spirit of vanity, sealed away by a long-dead cult. It could not fully manifest until it found the perfect vessel, a soul obsessed with its own reflection. Her endless self-portraits, her fascination with her own image, had made her the ideal host. The entity had used her reflection to take over her body. She wasn't its victim. She was its key. Suddenly, her body moved. Her reflection wearing her face raised her hand and, with a terrifying shove, tried to push Liam into the cold black water of the lake. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and betrayal. He grabbed onto her arm, fighting against the inhuman strength of the entity controlling her. "No, Kylie," he screamed. "Fight it!" But she was losing. Her body was already leaning, forcing him towards the water. In a final, desperate burst of defiance, Kylie looked at her reflection in Liam's own panicked eyes. She knew. The entity wasn't a separate being to be fought. It was a part of her now. And the only way to stop it was to end the vessel, to end herself. "Destroy the reflection," she shrieked, her own voice finally returning for a brief, horrifying moment. End the source. With a last agonizing act of will, she pulled away from Liam, her body trembling with the effort. She stumbled to the water's edge, ready to leap, to drown herself, to take the prisoner of the reflection with her and end the nightmare. But as she looked into the water, a new reflection stared back at her. It wasn't just her face. It was Liam's. His reflection, standing beside her, was smiling that same twisted, triumphant smile. The entity had not wanted to possess him through the water. It had only needed him to look into her eyes, where the new host, the new reflection, was already being formed. She looked back at Liam, and her heart froze. His eyes were no longer his. They were dark and hollow, a window to a soul that was no longer his own. A final bone-chilling realization hit her. The reflection in the water, the one that was about to jump, was the true Kylie. And the reflection standing behind her, now in Liam's body, was the monster. The real Liam had been replaced. The reflection, wearing Liam's face, didn't say a word. It just smiled, and with a quick, powerful shove, pushed Kylie's real body into the freezing lake. The last thing she saw before the water swallowed her whole was the face of her friend, a face now completely devoid of warmth, a face that was only a reflection of a monster. The prisoner was finally free, wearing a brand new face, ready to find its next reflection, its next host.